Trachtenberg Committee has issued a report of hundreds of pages which describes very well the problems facing the average Israeli. Essentially that he cannot, quote unquote, finish the month. He goes into debt every month. But then it offers solutions which involve raising taxes and creating new bureaucracies to weigh down the average Israeli. For instance, housing. The Trachtenberg Committee describes a housing market in which there is not enough rental housing and in which taxes are too high, and then describes how to fine-tune the government tenders to build more rental housing, to send teams of bureaucrats out to check who's going to be living in those houses. We at JIMS think this is absurd. The government owns 93% of the land. All it has to do is sell the land and the price will go down. All it has to do is cut taxes, which are today the equivalent of 30% of every apartment sold in Israel, and the price of housing will go down. Education policy is another example. The Trachtenberg Committee has described an educational system that is failing, and its solution for these problems is to put more people into the failing educational system, to give the government more money to build more classrooms and more schools, and to force people to educate their children in the state schools from the age of 3 instead of the age of 5 or 6. We think that a better recommendation would reform the system when Israelis are doing poorer every year on international exams, change the way the money is spent. Instead of giving the money to the Ministry of Education, which has failed over the course of a generation, give the money to the parents. Empower the parents to choose whatever school they would like to send their kids to. Then the schools will naturally compete against each other, principals will have more freedom of action, and parents will feel that they have a say in how their children are learning. Fiscal policy is another example of how the Trachtenberg Committee can describe a problem and then make a recommendation that does not follow from their description. It says that the tax cuts and the budget reductions of the past years have, and I quote, served Israel well over the decade's crises. And then the committee recommends abandoning these policies. We think that the taxes should continue to be cut as per government policy. The government had committed itself to cutting taxes until the year 2016 with a precise schedule. People invested on that basis. If Israel now says, well, we lied, and we're going to reverse that policy, what message is that going to send to foreign investors? If Israel now raises the tax burden on Israelis, how many Israelis will decide to move abroad because of that? When it comes to the high cost of living in Israel, the Trachtenberg Committee has outdone itself. It describes, for instance, quote, the government's difficulties in lowering prices because it is hard to control powerful institutions. But the Trachtenberg Committee has failed to mention that these institutions are government institutions, the Israel Lands Authority, the Israeli ports. The Trachtenberg Committee wants to encourage competition, and it focuses on products, such as agricultural produce. This is very important. But the Trachtenberg Committee has failed completely to address the problem that there's no competition in services. Israel has perhaps the most centralized banking system in the world, but the committee has not offered any way to open up the financial sector in Israel to new banks. The Trachtenberg Committee has described the high prices of cars in Israel. Once again, the government is completely to blame. They charge taxes that are incredible. 83% purchase tax, 16% value-added tax, 7% customs. We have more taxes imposed on cars than maybe any other country in the world. When it comes to housing policy, social and education policy, fiscal and tax policy, the high cost of living, the committee has chosen the route of creating new bureaucracies and funding them with higher taxes. We think that they would have done better to cut taxes and cut bureaucracy, which are the two main problems facing Israelis. Then Israelis would be free to operate in their economy without the burden of bureaucrats watching over their shoulders and without thinking that they're going to have to pay the government 60% of every shekel they earn.